Good morning. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this very special Earth Week presentation in Wayne State University Forum on Contemporary Issues in Society with award-winning scientist, conservationist, and documentarian David Suzuki. I'm Irvin D. Reed and Director of FOCIS, and it brings me great pleasure to be here with you in this role as the director of this lecture series. I'm also the inaugural holder of the Eugene Applebaum Chair in Community Engagement, and you'll hear more about that in just a moment. But it is a great honor to see the number of people from the community and from the student body. I know it's very busy this time of year for students, and I appreciate your being here as well, and I think it attests to the importance of our topic. The Applebaum Chair in Community Engagement is made possible through the generosity of alumnus Eugene Applebaum. The Applebaum Chair serves as a catalyst for university and community cooperation on issues in business, regional economic development, education, health, youth development, and other areas critical to the society, including education, but also the development here in Midtown, in Detroit, and all of southeastern Michigan. Through the chair, the university will seek strategic partnerships with community organizations to address urban issues that serve the public interest, while FOCIS promotes informed, often spirited debate on topics with global implications for society, and is but one of the chair's outreach activities. The chair and FOCIS symbolize Mr. Applebaum's belief in our city's future and in the university's ability to be a positive force in that future. FOCIS welcomed as its first speaker Robert F. Kennedy, Jr., who spoke on sustainability. The discussion then shifted to politics, and FOCIS presented award-winning journalist Bob Woodward for an election year address on the presidency. This past September, in collaboration with the university's Children Bridge, FOCIS hosted a special appearance by author, educator, and activist Jonathan Kozol, who spoke on the struggle to save our public schools. Also in September, Vicente Fox, former president of Mexico, was the first in an annual series on former heads of state to deliver a keynote address here at FOCIS. Now we are affirming our commitment to community engagement, not only by offering another acclaimed speaker in our lecture series, but also by working with departments across Wayne State to energize our communities toward responsible citizenship and sustainable living practices, organizing campus and community recycling efforts, coordinating a fundraising drive to support urban agriculture on our campus and in Midtown, and initiating sustainability-related service learning projects in several Detroit schools. Later this evening, we will host Sounds of the Earth, a very special and unique music performance featuring Wayne State University professors James Hartway and Douglas Bianchi, and the Wayne State University Symphony Wind Ensemble. The performance is co-sponsored by the Wayne State University Department of Music. I'd like to remind you that this lecture and the performance later this evening are held at no cost to you. But there are ways that you can do your part. There is still time to support our recycling effort on Ferry Mall, recycle clean business attire at Wayne Care's table outside the auditorium, or make a small contribution to our tree planting drive at the Burr Green table, which is also outside the auditorium doors. Through our public programs and many others across the university, Wayne State University has achieved enormous success in engaging the Detroit community. With your help, we look forward to even more impressive results. In this effort, we are partnering with the University Cultural Center Association and its president, Sue Mosey. And I'd like to thank Sue for all the support that she has provided in making today's program and its related activities possible. Sue, would you please stand and be acknowledged? For Wayne State, this kind of activism and community partnership is nothing new. In fact, it has been a part of our identity since we were a small, one-building college held entirely in a single structure on the corner of Cass and Warren Avenues. The university was then and is now committed not only to building tomorrow's leaders today, but also affirming its position as a premier urban research institution. As we know from the very first moment, his very first moments here in office, this commitment will continue to be a part of the university fabric under the leadership of Wayne State University President Jay Noreen. Dr. Noreen was sworn in as Wayne State's 10th president on August 1st, 2008, following his unanimous selection by the Wayne State University Board of Governors. A little more than 2 weeks ago, our university and Midtown communities celebrated Dr. Noreen's inauguration during a ceremony at the Detroit Institute of Art. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the 10th president of Wayne State University, Dr. Jay Noreen.
Thank you, Irv, and welcome everyone to a real highlight of our Earth Week event. I'm sure you're going to enjoy the presentation. As many of you probably know, Earth Week is an outgrowth of Earth Day. And Earth Week started now almost 4 decades ago, in 1970, and it was the result of a very unusual partnership. Senator Gaylord Nelson from Wisconsin and Dennis Hayes, a graduate student at the time at Stanford. Dennis Hayes is still an environmental advocate living in Seattle, dealing a lot with protection of oceans. So for those of you who are students in the audience, think about Dennis Hayes and think how you can have a profound impact on the future of the world, which he did and continues to have, beginning as a graduate student. Senator Gaylord Nelson is no longer with us, but he, with the support of Dennis Hayes and his band of advocates, students, and others around the country, successful in major environmental legislation, including the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act. In fact, the Environmental Protection Agency began largely as the advocacy of Senator Nelson and Dennis Hayes, and then, again, his band of advocates. So the world can be changed by students in collaboration with an unusual partner, in this case, Senator Gaylord Nelson. Wayne State is doing its part. It has a start in the kind of things that are happening on this campus, and emphases on sustainability and a lot of coursework. Seed Wayne, we're going to dedicate in the next 2 months 2 lead buildings, engineering and the Missouri Commons. And in fact, the engineering building will have a wind turbine. So we have a start, but there's so much more to do. The profound issues of environmental concerns in the 1970s were major. They're more major now, with global warming, with problems of sustainability and energy conservation. So today, again, we continue to inform the public about those major issues. I look forward to the presentation. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Jay, very much. We are here this morning to discuss a situation of great risk that we share with all life on this planet. Fortunately, we still have more power to address, we still have the power to address climate change, its causes, and ultimately limit its impact. A more wise use of energy, better agricultural practices, and more responsible stewardship of our natural resources can dramatically reduce carbon dioxide emissions and slow the progress of global warming. Today, we are joined by one of the best informed, most dynamic, sustainable ecology experts of our time, Dr. David Suzuki. Today, Dr. Suzuki is the co-founder of the David Suzuki Foundation. Is renowned for his radio and television programs that explain the complexities of the natural sciences in a compelling, easily understood way. Dr. Suzuki is a geneticist. He's graduated from Amherst College in Massachusetts in 1958 with an honors BA in biology, followed by a PhD in zoology from the University of Chicago. He held a research associateship in the biology division of the Tennessee's Oak Ridge National Lab, was an assistant professor in genetics at the University of Alberta, and since then has been a faculty member at the University of British Columbia. He is now Professor Emeritus at the University of British Columbia Sustainable Development Research Institute. A member of the Royal Society of Canada and a companion to the Order of Canada, Dr. Suzuki has written 43 books, including 17 for children. His 1976 textbook, An Introduction to Genetics Analysis, remains the most widely used genetic textbook in the U.S. and has been translated into Italian, Spanish, Greek, Indonesian, Arabic, French, and German. Dr. Suzuki has received consistently high acclaim for his 30 years of award-winning programs in Canadian broadcasting. In 1974, he developed and hosted the long-running popular science Quirks and Quarks on CBC Radio. He has since presented 2 influential documentaries, CBC radio series on the environment, It's a Matter of Survival, and From Naked Ape to Superspecies. He has won 4 Gemini Awards as Best Host of Canadian Television Series for The Nature of Things, which he has been with for 26 of the 46 seasons they have been on the air. His 8-part television series, A Planet for the Taking, won an award from the United Nations. His 8-part PBS series, The Secret of Life, was praised internationally, and as was his 5-part series, The Brain for the Discovery Channel. On June 10, 2002, he received the John Brain Award for Broadcasting Excellence. Dr. Suzuki is also recognized as a world leader in sustainable ecology. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. David Suzuki. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, wow. Thank you. Wow, thank you very much. It's a delight to be back here. I was telling some people earlier that I lived for 4 years in Leamington, Ontario, and Detroit was always a great place to go. The first zoo I ever went to was the Detroit Zoo, and that had I don't know what the state is today, but... And I must admit, for the first time in many, many years now, it's a joy to come back to the United States, now that this dark... As Dr. Reed mentioned, I did live in the United States for 8 years while I was going to university and getting an education that I couldn't get in Canada. But what I'm going to do today is to share with you information, thoughts that really are filtered through the lens of my Canadian perspective. And so you can draw whatever you wish for the United States. I don't have the nerve to make judgments about the United States. I think you got plenty of people to do that. I was asked when I agreed to come, I was asked to try to emphasize concrete things, examples of things that can be done to make this a greener place. But I really would like to provide you instead. There are lots of people with concrete things. There are books and books of things that can be done, and I know that Wayne State is now taking off like a rocket in the area of sustainability. But I feel a strong need to share with you the big picture, to see the urgency of the changes that are going to be required. We are at, I believe, an absolutely crucial moment in human history. For most of human existence, we lived in small family groups of nomadic hunter-gatherers. And even after we became farmers with the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago, we lived within very narrow confines of society and our territory. We didn't have to worry for most of human existence. We didn't have to worry what other people were doing on the other side of the ocean, across the mountain, or on the other side of a desert. We only had to worry about our own family, our own tribe, and maybe a few neighboring tribes that we had disagreements with. But we were a local tribal animal for most of human existence. But suddenly, that has all changed. For the first time in human history, we have absolutely have got to ask the question, what is the collective impact of all 6.7 billion human beings on the planet. We've never had to do that before. And it's very, very difficult to get our heads around that because we are fundamentally tribal animals. But we have to ask that question, and we don't have any global institutions that are really equipped to deal with these big questions of our common future. Human beings have become a new kind of force on the planet. In the 4 billion years that life has existed on this planet, there was never a single species able to alter the physical, chemical, and biological features of the planet as human beings are doing today. There's no precedent for our position on the planet. We are now the most numerous mammal on the planet. I was in Australia a few years ago and I said, there are more human beings than all the rabbits in the world. And right away they went, whoa, that's a lot of people. There are more of us than all the rats in the world, than all of the mice in the world. We are the most numerous mammal on Earth. And just the act of living, we all have to breathe the air. We have to drink water. We have to eat food that comes from the soil. We need energy. We have to feed and clothe ourselves. Just the act of living means that we have a collective, huge ecological footprint. That is, it takes a huge amount of land and sea to support us, just to keep us alive. But of course, we're not like rabbits or rats or mice. We're much more than that. Each of us, in the clothes that we wear, in the vehicles that we drive, in the food that we eat, in the computers we use, and every aspect of our lives is impacted by technology. Technology used on our behalf so that we can live the way we do. And that amplifies our ecological footprint far beyond any other species that has ever existed. And it doesn't end there, just with technology. Ever since the end of World War II, we have been afflicted with an incredible appetite for stuff. We are consummate consumers, and consumption, everything that we use, comes ultimately out of the biosphere, comes out of the earth. And when we use it and throw it away, it goes back into the earth. And consumption raises again our impact, our ecological footprint, and of course our consumptive appetite is fed by a global economy that it uses the entire planet as a source of raw materials. And when you add that all together, our numbers, our technological muscle power, our consumption, and our global economy, that explains why we have become a new kind of force on the planet. In 1990, the World Watch Institute in Washington, D.C. designated the 1990s as the turnaround decade. They said, we've got 10 years, and if we don't turn humanity onto a different path, we are in deep, deep trouble. And that's when we started my foundation. The David Suzuki Foundation was started out of that sense of urgency that the World Watch Institute had made the call to all of us to get involved in making a massive shift. And we thought we had 10 years to do it in. Well, 10 years came and went. It's almost 20 years now, and we're still fighting the same problems, although it's now 2 decades worse in terms of the environmental issues that we confront. In Canada, for the past 2 years, the environment, energy, and health have been at the absolute top of public concern. And of course, now that the economy has gone belly up in Canada because we are so tightly tied to the American economy, we can't help but be sucked down by whatever is happening to the American economy. Now that the economy is in trouble, all our focus is shifted over to the economy. But the economy, health, energy, the environment, these are not isolated issues. They are all deeply integrated or interconnected. And one of our problems is that we seem to deal with our issues on a one-by-one basis. So if there's an energy problem, the price is going up, then we focus on energy. And when hospital bills start climbing, then we focus on health. We've got to take this congruence or confluence of these various issues, the environment, health, energy, and the economy, and see how they are exquisitely interconnected. I believe this crisis is an opportunity to get it right. let's consider these crises and see where they do overlap. The environment, as your president indicated, in 1970, we saw the beginning of the Earth Day events. But really, the modern environmental movement began, I believe, in 1962. And that's where a woman named Rachel Carson published a book called Silent Spring. It was all about the unexpected effects of pesticides. And it's hard today to imagine the impact that her book had on the world. In 1962, when her book came out, there wasn't a single department or minister of the environment in any government on the planet. If you said the word environment in 1962, it didn't connote anything like what it means today. So that was really, we began in a time of total innocence. And of course, the environmental movement exploded in 10 years. By 1972, it was a global movement involving millions of people, and the first United Nations Conference on the Environment was held in Stockholm. That's when the United Nations Environment Program was established, and we thought we were on our way to better things. Indeed, by 1988, around the world, the environment was at the absolute top of the agenda. In 1988, a guy ran for president of the United States and said, if you vote for me, I promise I will be an environmental president. His name was George H.W. Bush. He didn't have a green bone in his body, but he said it because the American people demanded it of him. And of course, as soon as he was elected, he proved what that campaign promises don't mean much. He quickly became the worst environmental president you've ever had. And he stayed that way until his son was elected, and then he became the second worst environmental president. Oh, but I'm sorry. I promised you I was only going to talk about Canadian perspectives. I shouldn't have said that. Last year, I was invited by the EPA to give a talk to the whole EPA in Washington. I said that same thing about George Bush. Not a smile in the audience. Wow. In 1988, Margaret Thatcher was filmed picking up litter in London, and she turned to the camera and said, well, I'm a greenie too. In 1988, we re-elected a man named Brian Mulroney to be Prime Minister, and to show his born-again environmentalism, he appointed his brightest political star, a man named Lucien Bouchard, to be Minister of the Environment. I interviewed Lucien 3 months after he was selected for the Environment Ministry, and I said, what is the most important issue facing Canadians today? 1988, his immediate reaction was global warming. That was impressive right away. So I said, well, how serious is it? And these are his exact words. It threatens the survival of our species. We have to act now. So the politicians had got the message. In 1988, there was a major conference of 300 atmosphere scientists in Toronto, Ontario. And at that conference, the scientists declared the evidence is in, the climate is changing, and humans are the cause of it. And they were so concerned, they said in their press release at the end of the conference, global warming represents a threat to human survival second only to all-out nuclear war. And they called for a 20% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in 15 years. Think if we had done it. If we had followed the scientific advice, we would be so far past the Kyoto target, and we would literally be saving tens of billions of dollars every year in energy savings, in terms of health costs, all kinds of benefits that would have come from meeting those objectives. But we didn't. We didn't follow up. And the question is, why? Well, I think there are a number of reasons. One is that shortly after 88, we went into a small recession, and immediately people began to focus on the economy. But far more insidious than that, ExxonMobil began to spend millions of dollars, along with millions coming from the other fossil fuel industries. But ExxonMobil, to me, was the leader in this whole campaign of disinformation, setting up phony websites, calling the climate change junk science, supporting a handful of skeptics to say, no, 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 this is a natural warming cycle, humans aren't the cause of it, and it worked. They created confusion in the minds of the public because we in the media fell into the trap. We would do shows. I did my first show on global warming in 1989. So you show a scientist saying, this is urgent, we've got to do something. But in the name of balance, we had to put someone on the other side saying, no, 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 this isn't. But what we did was create a sense of total imbalance because the vast majority of scientists were saying climate change is serious, we got to do something. And a handful of skeptics were saying no, and we acted as if they were 50-50. And so the public then said, oh, well, I mean, the scientists haven't made up their minds, we don't have to do anything. And to this day, especially in the United States, tremendous amount of denial about the reality or the seriousness of global warming. And I believe that what the fossil fuel industry did was absolutely criminal. It was a criminal distortion of information, and the crime is a crime against future generations. It's an intergenerational crime. And it makes me sick. We watch CNN a lot in my household. It makes me sick to see the Exxon commercials now about, oh, how great we are and we're reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Yeah, right. But today the need for action is urgent. Climate change now is undeniable unless you have your head totally buried in the sand. We are undergoing an unprecedented change in the chemistry of the atmosphere. But it's far more than just the atmosphere that we have to concern ourselves. The oceans cover 70% of the Earth's surface. And the oceans, which I was taught in the 1950s in high school, I was taught the oceans are a source of limitless protein. Well, they may have been in the 1950s. They're not now. And all the indications are we are fishing our way down the food chain. Over 90% of the large fish, the swordfish, the bluefin tuna, sharks are gone, and they're not coming back. But we then go after the northern cod and the haddock and orange roughy and Chilean sea bass. And then when they're gone, we go the next step down. Daniel Pauly, an eminent marine biologist, says we're at the fourth level down. And I notice in Canada, when you read the cooking pages in the newspaper, guess what they're touting? Oh, the great find is anchovies and sardines. Why? Because that's all that's left of any quantity. And guess what? My prediction is within 5 years, those same pages are going to be touting the benefits of jellyfish. Because jellyfish are now the most numerous protoplasm that we have in the oceans. I tried some in Chinatown a couple of weeks ago. It's not bad if you like plastic with a little flavor in it. But there we go. We're fishing our way, and of course you know the oceans are in terrible shape in terms of pollution. The number of dead zones and the size of them is growing every year in the oceans of the world. And these great gyres in the ocean where the ocean is circulating like this, basically centrifuging what we throw into the oceans. There is, in one of the gyres in the Pacific Ocean, there is an island of plastic bigger than the state of Texas. And there are these islands of garbage now throughout the oceans of the world. The frightening thing is because we've built up the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere at the interface between the air and the oceans, we're now getting carbon dissolving into the oceans as carbonic acid. And that is acidifying, the pH is dropping of the oceans, and that is causing all kinds of problems with the food chain in the oceans. The effect of carbon dioxide buildup is being felt on land as well. In British Columbia, we have now lost over $65 billion worth of trees because the mountain pine beetle, which is a normal parasite in our forests, is normally kept under control by humidity and if we have 4 or 5 consecutive days in the winter that are 40 degrees below zero, then the mountain pine beetle is killed off, and that's what's kept it under control. But now, of course, the winters aren't nearly that cold, and pine beetles have exploded and destroyed our forests. If you fly over the northern part of my province, the forests have turned from green to bright red, and it's been an ecological catastrophe, and of course the lumber industry is just in perilous condition as a result. There are only 3 large intact forests left on the planet. The largest one is the boreal forest in Canada, the Amazon and Papua New Guinea. And if we continue the rate of destruction of forests that's going on today, there won't be any large forests left on the planet within the next 20 years. And with that, of course, with the terrible condition of the oceans and the forests, we're losing, the United Nations estimates, over 50,000 species are going extinct every year. We have used the air, the water, and the soil of the planet as a toxic dump. We dump garbage into the air, water, and soil without a second thought, but the result is if we think that we're somehow separated from the earth, we are sadly mistaken. 3 members of Parliament last year volunteered to be tested for a battery of over 85 toxic chemicals, and they were shocked to discover all 3 of them carried dozens of toxic chemicals in their bodies. If you read the book, the bestseller recently, The World Without Us, he says that every one of us carries an average of about 5 to 6 pounds of plastic dissolved in our bodies. We are the earth. We're created out of the air, the water, the soil. If we use the earth as a garbage can, is there any reason to think that we are not going to be affected? And of course, that is reflected in health costs, because we're not taking care of the planet. We can't have healthy people if we don't have a healthy environment. Ever since Nixon's war on cancer, we've spent hundreds of billions of dollars on research on cancer. And look at the rates. The rates of cancer are not dropping. Indeed, for the first time, cancer is now the #1 killer in North America. And it's not just because we're living longer, but the fact is that cancer in young people is skyrocketing in incidence. It makes no sense, as I say, to dump toxics into air, water, and soil as if it's going to go away, because that's what makes who we are. So there's no distinction between health and the environment as far as I'm concerned. Energy, of course, we become totally dependent on this wonderful resource called oil. Oil is easily portable. You can carry it around. It's got high energy content per unit of volume, and it's been, up until very recently, unbelievably cheap. And so now we've got, if you didn't worry about climate change, we've got a problem, and that is that humanity's demand for oil now, many people believe that it's greater than the supply. We've reached peak oil, and as our oil supplies begin to drop, and you know you've depleted your fields in Oklahoma, Texas is dropping, even the North Slope in Alaska, now you've passed peak oil, you're dropping. Around the world, if we've truly hit peak oil, as the supply dwindles, the demand is going to exceed the supply, and boy, if we think $147 a barrel was a lot, we ain't seen nothing yet. And that's going to lead to incredible problems when you think of how much you import in the United States from volatile areas like Venezuela, Nigeria, of course the Middle East, Russia. I mean, no wonder you guys are looking at Canada as this great supplier. We are now the biggest supplier of oil to the United States. And a lot of that is coming from the tar sands, which is the worst, dirtiest kind of oil you can get. And I'm begging Americans to pay attention to the actual ecological cost of your oil. And if that's the case, you certainly won't buy any of that tar sands oil. Unfortunately, Canadians aren't worried about that because the Chinese and Indians will take every drop of oil we want to sell them. So even if America said, no, we don't want your dirty oil, we won't run out of a market. If we think in terms of a sustainable energy future, and I believe if Americans are concerned about security, then surely to goodness, a secure energy future is going to be a sustainable energy future. Fossil and nuclear fuels are finite. They're going to run out. And so by definition then, fossil and nuclear fuels are cannot be a part of your sustainable future. And then there have the added problem that when you use nuclear and fossil fuels, you got a problem at the end. You got a problem with waste, with nuclear energy. You've got a problem with carbon dioxide generation with fossil fuels. So it seems to me the challenge at this moment then, in terms of energy security, the only way to go in terms of a sustainable future is to renewable energy. And that's why I think that Al Gore's call for 100% renewable electricity within 10 years is the call to make. This call is a target that is comparable to the Manhattan Project, and we now need to dump all of our efforts into that area because that is the only way to have a secure energy future. In 1973, the world got the first warning about the dangers of being so dependent on imported oil. In 1973, few people here are old enough to remember the Arab oil embargo. And that was for political reasons. It had to involve Israel and all of that. But that was a really frightening time. The cost of oil in 2009 dollars went way beyond $150 a barrel. And you saw in the United States lineups at gas stations. I mean, it was a very frightening time because the economic implications of that huge escalation in oil prices was really terrifying. And of course, in typical American fashion, you started shooting each other at the lineups and all that. Canadians don't do that, but but that was a warning shot. And you remember what happened. Jimmy Carter turned down the thermostat in the White House, began to wear sweaters, and everybody mocked him and made fun of him. He installed solar panels on the roof of the White House. And that was a serious address to an example of what we could do in a very simple way to begin to reduce that heavy dependence on foreign oil. But as soon as Reagan was elected, then everything was off. The standards for fuel efficiency were dropped. Solar panels were ripped out, and it was back with business as usual. In Denmark, in Germany, in Sweden, they said, holy cow, we've got a problem. We import most of our oil. We got to do something. And they paid attention to the implications, and it's not an accident that Denmark now generates over 18% of its energy by wind power. It's not an accident that Germany is now the leading country in export of wind turbines, and it is the biggest job creator in Germany over the last 20 years has been in the area of renewable energy. But in North America, we didn't pay attention. Oil prices fell down again, and we went back to business as usual. If indeed we are at or near peak oil, the implications of this are enormous. As economies begin to grow again, the demand for dwindling supplies of oil are going to create economic chaos. And certainly, I think the whole airlines industry, I keep saying in Canada, what the hell are you building more runways for? Don't you realize the future of the air industry is in great jeopardy? If you think Detroit is melting down because of cars, just think about the airlines industry. This is this is not sustainable, the kind of air travel that we use. I'm a big fan of dirigibles. I think that's the way we should be going. But I mean, everything is going to change. We are going to, you think about these big suburbs where people live in gigantic homes, huge heating and cooling bills, and they completely depend on automobiles to get to and from work. They're going to have to collapse because the cost of energy is going to escalate. You think about the box stores that depend so much on international trade. I can't see that a company like Walmart, for example, can continue in a world after we've passed peak oil. And certainly the big challenge is going to be food. It makes no sense. Right now, we are converting oil into food. That's what we're doing, basically. We put in so many calories of energy, and we get out fewer calories of food. And that's just not, that's totally unsustainable. And then we ship food on average in the United States over 2,000 miles from where it's grown to where it's consumed. That all has to collapse. And there we're going to find a great example that we're going to have to rush to find out how they do it from Cuba. Cuba, you know, after they were living in paradise. The Soviet Union took all of their sugar at a premium price and gave them as much oil as they wanted. And they had the most intensive industrial agriculture in the world, in Cuba. Lots of use of tractors and machinery. when the Soviet Union broke apart, overnight Cubans lost their big market for sugar, and they lost all of their oil from Russia. And the result of that was that overnight, the average caloric intake of Cubans dropped by 30% because they just didn't have the energy to even transport the food from the countryside to the city. And the amazing response to that was that Castro said, in the cities, if there's an empty lot there anywhere and you're willing to grow food on it, take it. And if you don't know how to grow food, I'll send you people to help you. If you don't have the tools to do it, I'll give you the tools. Today in Havana and all of the cities in Cuba, 80% of the food consumed in the city is grown in the city. It's generated jobs. Yeah. We sent a delegation of... Pardon me? Not only do... Okay, if you want to get off on that, let me tell you something about that. Cuba, this poor country, impoverished because of America's policy, which I think is scandalous. Cuba has the highest ratio of medical care to public of any country in the world. And not only that, but 6 or 7 years ago, Castro built an international medical school, and every year they're turning out 1,500 MDs, and you know what? They come from the poor countries of the world where you get a free medical training, and all you do, you only have 2 requirements. You have to come from a poor area or poor country, and you have to learn Spanish to take your lessons, and you have to promise at the end of that you will go back to where you came from to practice medicine. They are pumping out doctors primarily going to Africa and Latin America, 1,500 every year at Cuban expense. And guess what? Some of them now are American students coming from Harlem, coming from various disadvantaged areas in the United States. It's humiliating to have that poor country doing that for the rest of the world. But anyway, I'm sorry you got me off on it. I went down and did some films on Cuba, and so now the economy is finally melted down, and we're all focused on the economy. Well, you know, when I think of the economy, I think, gee, not very long ago, couple hundred years ago, people believed there were dragons and demons and monsters. And we took them really seriously. If we thought they were pissed off at us, we got really scared. You know, you'd sacrifice virgins, pump money, and hope to appease the demons and monsters. But now, of course, we know those were figments of our imagination. So you'd think we'd be better off. But what have we done? We've created something else. It's just like those demons. It's called the economy. All you have to do is read the newspapers, and you'd swear the economy was a thing. Oh, the economy's not looking good. The economy's pretty sick these days, you know. What the economy needs is to be fed the right signals. I mean, I'm not making that up. That's the way it's... So, you know, and my God, do we get scared when the economy's looking bad? I mean, well, we don't have any virgins to sacrifice, but shovel money, I mean, my God. You know, I mean, with hundreds of billions of dollars, shovel it into the banks and pray. We've gone... And, you know, the thing that's frightening, the economy is not a force of nature. I mean, there are some things, the speed of light, gravity, entropy, first and second laws of thermodynamics. You got to pay attention to those things because they're real. And there's nothing we can do about it. We have to live with it. But the economy is not a force of nature. We created the damn thing. And if it isn't working, we got to fix it. The last thing you want to do is just try to keep it going and get us back into the same mess. Now, I want to remind you that economics and ecology come from the same word. Ecos, the Greek word meaning household or domain. So ecology is the study of home. Economics is the management of home. Now, what ecologists try to do is to determine what are the conditions and principles that allow life to survive and flourish on the planet. Not a bad set of information to know. Now, I would have thought any group in society, before they start a new program or a new business or whatever, would say, wait a minute now, what was it those ecologists tell us are the principles and conditions? Because whatever we do, we better not violate those principles and conditions, because that's what keeps us alive and healthy. But what we have done is that we have elevated economics above ecology. In my country, we have a guy that loved George Bush, and when we say, well, we've got to do something about global warming, his answer has been, we can't do anything about that, it'll destroy the economy. So I actually had a minister of the environment in Alberta, which is comparable to your state of Texas. The Alberta environment minister said to me, listen, Suzuki, you guys better understand that we can't afford to protect the environment if we don't have a strong growing economy. So we've elevated the economy above ecology. So the big challenge is let's put the eco back into economics. Remember the eco part of that whole thing. And the problem we face today is the economy is fundamentally flawed and is inevitably driving us to destroy the biosphere. And let me say first, we're not going to destroy the Earth. The Earth is happy with or without us. The Earth is going to do fine. But the biosphere is the area of air, water, and land where all life exists, and we are altering that in a fundamental way. Now, the fundamental problem with the economy, two things I'd like to point out that we've got to fix. Nature in the oceans and on land, nature performs services that an animal like us depend on for our very survival. Let me illustrate it. Back in the 1980s, the Lytton Indian Band called me and said, look, our sacred valley, the Stein Valley, has been given over by the BC government, gave a license to a multinational forest company to log it. Fletcher Challenge from New Zealand is going to go in and log it. Would you help us protect this valley from logging? We don't want any industrial activity in there. So I said, okay, I'll try to help you. And the first thing I did was take my family, and we went camping in the valley. I wanted to see what it was that they treasured, and it's a magnificent valley of virgin forest and all that. So after 5 days of camping, we were hiking out, and we ran into a party coming up along the trail. And I knew that these weren't ordinary campers. They had suits and ties on. So I very quickly, you meet and chat, and I realized this is no ordinary guy. This is the CEO of Fletcher Challenge. The company's going to log it. And he quickly realized, oh my God, this is that shit disturber David Suzuki. So very quickly, we got into conversation that escalated very quickly into a shouting match. And finally, in frustration, he said, listen, Suzuki, are tree huggers like you willing to pay to protect those trees? Because if you don't pay for those trees, they don't have any value till someone cuts them down. And for me, that was an epiphany. I went, oh my God, he's absolutely right. You see, as long as that forest is healthy and standing, all of the green things in it are taking carbon dioxide, putting oxygen back into the air. Not a bad service for an animal like us. Indeed, we wouldn't be alive if all the green things in the world weren't doing that. But to economists, that's called an externality. It's not in the economic equation. That's why you can dump stuff into the air without paying the cost of what you're doing to the atmosphere. It's an externality. Those trees, the roots hold the soil, so when it rains, the soil doesn't run into the spawning gravels of the salmon. That's an externality. Those trees are pumping millions of gallons of water out of the soil, transpiring it into the atmosphere and moderating weather and climate. Externality. The forest provides habitat for fungi, insects, birds, mammals, amphibians. That's an externality. So all those things that standing forest is doing for us to make the planet habitable and useful, all those things are economically irrelevant. That's why a lot of people say conventional economics is a form of brain damage. It is. How can you live on the earth and act as if nature's services are irrelevant to the economic system? Now, there are scientists, or there are economists called ecological economists, that are trying to internalize a lot of nature's costs. That is, they say, what would it cost us if we didn't have these services and we had to do it ourselves? Well, a lot of things that we would never be able to do. For example, the most frightening report I read in many years was when I heard about colony collapse disorder, when honeybees in the United States suddenly began to die out. Frightening, terrifying, because if we don't have pollination, we don't survive. It's as simple as that. Terrestrial ecosystems around the world will collapse. So this is, and we could never replace pollination. We may think we're clever. We will never be able to do what pollinators do for us as a service. But some things we can estimate. How much would it cost to filter the water? I mean, I'm sure your filtration bill here must be huge for your water. The solution is not to buy bottled water. Don't drink bottled water, the dumbest idea in the world. But there are a number of services that we can estimate what it would cost us to do it. Bob Costanza at the University of Vermont did this many years ago and came up with a very crude estimate that of about $33 trillion a year would cost us if we had to do what nature does for nothing. When he published his paper, the annual GDPs of every country on the planet came to $18 trillion. So nature is doing twice as much service for us if we had to do what nature is doing. And that's considered an externality in our economic system. If that isn't brain damage, I don't know what the heck is. Now, so we've got to internalize these costs. And I'm sorry, we're going to have to pay a hell of a lot more for a lot of things, including dumping carbon into the atmosphere. But there's another problem that we face. That is, if you listen to economists, they say the economy can grow forever. Well, wait a minute. We live in the biosphere. The biosphere is fixed. It can't grow. As Carl Sagan used to point out, if you shrank the Earth to the size of a basketball, the biosphere would be thinner than a layer of varnish on that basketball. And that's it. It can't grow. How can anything within that finite world, how can anything think it can grow forever? I mean, our bodies are made up on average of about 100 trillion cells. One cancer cell out of 100 trillion is nothing. And that old cancer cell thinks, oh, well, I can divide and, keep dividing and divide. Long before it's a really significant size, it'll kill you. Because nothing can grow in a finite world forever. But economists think the economy can grow forever, which it cannot. But they actually believe it must grow forever because the very definition of progress is by whether the economy grew this year or not. But if growth is just a means to an end. What is an economy for? I mean, just to grow. What the hell does that mean? It's just a means to something else. Are we better off? Are we happier? Is there a limit? How much is enough? I'm telling you, one of the problems I have with our house is people keep giving me stuff. We got stuff coming out of every pore, and we've got too much stuff, and yet nobody ever says, gee, wouldn't life be a lot better without all this stuff? We just got to grow forever. Now, I'm going to show you why. First of all, this is an empty goal to think that growth is a be-all and end-all. But I'm going to show you why it's suicidal. Anything growing steadily over time, whether it's the amount of unemployment, whether it's the size of your city, the number of people, the amount of garbage you make, anything growing steadily over time is called exponential growth. And anything growing exponentially has a predictable doubling time, okay? So if it's growing at 1% a year, it'll double in 70 years. 2% a year in 35 years. 3% it'll double in 24 years. 4% in 17 and a half years. Anything growing exponentially has a predictable doubling time. I'm going to give you a system analogous to the planet. I'm going to give you a test tube. That's Earth, filled with food for bacteria. And I'm going to put one bacterial cell in, and it's going to divide every minute. That's exponential growth. So at time 0, at the beginning, there's one bacteria minute. In 1 minute, there are 2. In 2 minutes, there are 4. 3 minutes, there are 8. 4 minutes, 16. That's exponential growth. And at 60 minutes, the test tube is completely packed with bacteria, and there's no food left. Okay? So it's a 60-minute growth cycle. When is the test tube half full? Well, the answer, of course, is at 59 minutes. Been around for 59 minutes of a 60-minute cycle, it's only half full. 1 minute later, it's full, right? So at 58 minutes, it's 25% full. At 57 minutes, it's 12.5% full. At 55 minutes of a 60-minute cycle, it's 3% full. So if at 55 minutes, one of the bacteria said, hey, guys, I've been thinking, we got a population problem. The other bacteria would say, Jack, what the hell have you been smoking, man? 97% of the test tube's empty and we've been around for 55 minutes. And they'd be 5 minutes away from filling. So the bacteria are no smarter than humans. That 59 minutes, they go, oh my God, Jack was right. We got 1 minute left. What the hell are we going to do now? Well, don't give any money to those economists. Give it to those scientists. And by God, in less than a minute, those bacterial scientists come up with 3 more test tubes full of food. So they quadruple the amount of, that would be like us finding 3 more planets to use. So they quadruple the amount of food and space in less than a minute. So they're saved, right? So what happens? At 60 minutes, the first test tube's full. 61 minutes, the second's full. At 62 minutes, all 4 test tubes are full. By quadrupling the amount of food and space, you buy 2 extra minutes. How do you add even a fraction of 1% more of air, water, biodiversity? We can't. The planet's fixed. The biosphere is fixed. And every scientist I've talked to agrees with me. We're already past the 59th minute. So here you have the wealthiest country ever in human history, the most powerful, wealthy country on the planet. And where are we talking about, hey, this steady demand for growth, and especially in a time of an economic downturn, this must be considered heresy for me to come into Detroit and start saying you can't grow forever and you can't grow your way out of your problems. But the reality is, I agree that we're already past the 59th minute. Now, when I say this to politicians and business people, as I often do in Canada, they get really angry at me. How dare you say we're past the 59th minute? Look at our stores. They're filled with stuff. People are living longer. We're healthier. How dare you say we're past the 59th minute? I say it without apology. We have created the illusion that everything is all right by using up the rightful legacy of future generations. Just talk to anyone who lived in Detroit 60 or 70 years ago and ask them what it was like here. And I dare say there may have been some things that are cleaned up, but my bet is that they will say, oh, it used to be way different from what it is now, and by that they mean better. I've talked to elders in the Amazon and the Serengeti Plains in Australia and New Zealand. I ask people 70, 80 years old, what was it like here when you were a kid? And everywhere they say, oh, it used to be so different. There used to be trees as far as you could see. There used to be birds that would darken the sky. Used to be fish that would jam the river at certain times of the year. Our elders are a living record of the enormous changes taking place in a span of a single human life. And that is simply not sustainable. We are using up the biological capital of the earth, all in the name of continued economic growth. It's just not sustainable. It's not possible. Indeed, that drive for growth's sake is suicidal and creating much of the problem that we face in the world. How did we arrive at this incredible moment in time? Biologists today use DNA. Sorry, when did I start and how long do I have? Biologists today can use DNA. I was a geneticist for my professional life. And it's amazing what scientists can now do looking at DNA. And you can use DNA as a clue to follow the trail of human movement and in the past. And all of the trails lead back to Africa 150,000 years ago. You may think you're not an African American, but we are all Africans in our genes. And try to imagine what the world was like when our species appeared in the plains of Africa. You know, back 150,000 years ago, there were still woolly mammoths roaming the earth. There were saber-toothed tigers, giant moa birds 10 feet tall. All across North America were giant sloths. The world was very, very different. And if we looked at the Serengeti 150,000 years ago, I mean, it would make today's Serengeti look unpopulated. They must have been filled with vast herds of animals of every size and shape. And if we could transport ourselves and look down, we would see these immense herds of animals, and here and there little clumps of 3, 4, or 5 funny-looking two-legged furless apes. That was us. Now, looked at in that context, you got to admit, we weren't very impressive. I mean, who would have thought 150,000 years ago, watch that naked ape, they're going to take over the planet. I mean, give me a break. There weren't many of us. We weren't very big or fast or strong, and we certainly didn't have special sensory acuity. What did we have going for us? Well, of course, the answer is you couldn't see the secret of our success. It was that 2-kilogram organ buried deep in our skulls. The human brain conferred our advantage. We had a vast memory. No other mammal on Earth has the memory capacity of a human brain. We were curious, and we were inventive. And those qualities more than compensated for our lack of physical or sensory ability. And that brain did something absolutely unique. The brain invented an idea called the future. The future doesn't exist. The only thing that exists is now and what we can remember from the past. But because we invented the idea of a future, we are the only animal that realized we can affect the future by what we do today. If we look at our experience and our knowledge, we can look ahead and see where the dangers are and where the opportunities lie. And we can deliberately choose today to avoid the dangers and exploit the opportunities. I believe foresight was the great attribute that got us out of Africa and to take over the planet. That ability to look ahead. And it got us to where we have become the dominant animal on the planet. And now we've got all of the increased ability to look ahead. We call them scientists. We have supercomputers. We have engineers and telecommunication. And for over 40 years, the leading scientists of the world have been telling us we are headed down a very dangerous path. You got it turned off? Thank you. That there are opportunities to go in a different direction. And now, at the moment when we need that foresight, we're turning our backs on it. Well, you might think we don't need to do what people did in the past. We've become the dominant creature. I just want to remind you that we did a film over 20 years ago where leading scientists were saying New Orleans is a disaster waiting to happen. You build a major city in an area where hurricanes are a natural part of the ecology of the city. There's going to be hurricanes hitting this city. And half the city is below sea level. If you want to avoid a catastrophe, this is what you got to do. And for decades, politicians and business people said, that'll ruin the economy. We can't do anything about that. And we all know that Katrina came and fulfilled everything the scientists had predicted. Foresight was never more important than it is now. Scientists are warning us, and we're failing to act. And I don't have time now to go on and say, why are we not listening to scientists and what can we do? Let me just say, the challenges are great. And I just want to end with a story. I was in my senior year in college at Amherst in 1957. And on October 4th, 1957, we were electrified to hear the announcement that the Soviet Union had launched Sputnik. Nobody even knew there was a space program. And for those of you old enough to remember 1957, you know, each of the branches of the armed services in the United States had their own rocket. So the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force all tried to send up a grapefruit-sized satellite, and all of them blew up on the launch pad. And meanwhile, the Russians launched the first animal in space, a dog, Laika. The first man in space, Yuri Gagarin. The first team of cosmonauts. The first woman, Valentina Tereshkova. And we were trying to still get Alan Shepard up into a suborbital flight, and then John Glenn finally made it around the Earth, and we realized, oh my God, the Soviet Union is very advanced in science and technology. Americans didn't roll over and say, oh my God, this is too far. We can't possibly catch up. When John Kennedy announced the race to the moon, the intent to beat the Russians to the moon, nobody said those damn Democrats are going to spend us into poverty. What the hell does he think he's doing? Everybody said, we've got to do this. And it was a glorious time, even though I was a foreigner living in your country. All you had to do was say, I like science, and you threw money at us. It was great. And look at what happened. Look at what happened when you made that commitment. Not only are Americans the only people to walk on the moon, but nobody had any idea that you would develop cell phones, that there would be GPS, that there would be 24-hour-a-day news networks. All of those things were spin-offs that resulted because America made the commitment. And 2 years ago, every single Nobel Prize in science was won by an American. Why? Because 45 years earlier, America said, we've got to win this battle. It's un-American to say that we can't win the battle on climate change. That's not the American way. And I guarantee you, once that commitment's made, and you show the kind of spirit that this country is capable of, all kinds of unexpected things and benefits are going to rain down. It takes the initial recognition, you've got the crisis of our times, and we've got to make the commitment. But I look to America to lead the way now into the solutions. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Suzuki. As you can see, except for economists, your message was well received. We have questions really from this audience. They participated in the process as they registered online. We asked them to submit questions that they would ask you. So I'm going to read those questions and you can respond to them.
Now I know a lot of you have classes in that. Please, I won't be offended if you have to get up and go.
The French use nuclear power with much success, having developed a standard design in 3 sizes with multiple safety interlocks. The U.S. Navy has used it for over half a century, yet many in the United States have their reservations about this energy source. What is your personal opinion of nuclear power, and is it a viable source of alternative energy for Canada and the United States?
Well, I mean, it's certainly a lot of people in the environmental community are so desperate about the state of climate change now that people like Jim Lovelock, who invented this notion of Gaia, says Lovelock seems, I'm just reading his last book now, seems to be saying it's too late, that we've just tipped the atmosphere too much and it's too late. But he sees our only option really being nuclear. And I don't see it. The cost of nuclear, I mean, when it's the state of our survival or not, I guess cost shouldn't enter into it. But the Canadian experience is the nuclear industry in Canada. We have one province, Ontario, that gets over 40% of its energy from nuclear. And it's never come in on time. It's never come in under budget for any of the plants that we've built. And we've got this huge problem of waste, and the terrorism now adds another dimension to it. But as I say, in the long run, it's not sustainable. The cost of uranium is skyrocketing now because there's only so much of it, and there's greater and greater demand. If we're going to go to a sustainable future, it's got to be renewable energy, it seems to me. Now let me tell our engineer, we have a CANDU reactor. It's a Canadian reactor, and our government's trying to peddle it all over the world. And they say, oh, well, it's foolproof. Don't worry about it, it's foolproof. Well, what's a foolproof technology? It's a technology free of fools. Right? And who among us has never been a fool at some point? And you fall in love and lose 50 IQ points. You go to a party, you get drunk, and you come into work hungover, or you get the flu, but you don't want to miss a day of work. All kinds of things make us act foolishly. There is no such thing as a foolproof technology unless you get rid of the fools, and that's what we saw in 2001, the consequence of that. I don't believe that in France, apparently, they're up around 80%, but they've peaked. They're not going to build any more. And I'd like to know why that is, why they don't go 100%. And I don't believe for a minute there aren't all kinds of accidents that have been covered up. Because, as I say, I don't believe there's a foolproof technology.
What is the best way that you have found to inspire others to take the challenge and live a more earth-friendly lifestyle?
It's a very difficult thing because, first of all, we're watching commercials day in and day out telling us what the real good life is all about. It's about having more stuff. You know, Coke advertises itself as the real thing. What the hell does that mean? I mean, isn't everything around the real thing? But we don't, you know, so the drive to consume, huge part of our lives. And that's going to be very difficult to change. And what I find is adults are very hard to get to change their habits. You know, you go to school, get your education, get a job, get married, buy a house, have kids, and then environmentalists come along and say, you got to change. They get mad. And I understand that. So what I've done, you mentioned that I've written 17 books for children. That's deliberate. Not because I believe we have time to wait till kids come up and replace us. We don't have that time. But we adults have one very strong vulnerability, and that's their children. If a child comes to you and says, Mom, Dad, what are you doing to protect the future for me? Then I believe every parent has got to become an eco-warrior on behalf of that child. So the child is there to remind us to take our eyes off the bottom line. We're so focused on, you know, the mortgage payments and my job and all that we don't look and see what's happening to the planet in terms of the future for our children. So I speak to children quite often, and they say, what can I do? I say, look, you've got to talk to the two most important people on the planet, your mom and dad. If your mom and dad aren't willing to get out there and actively work for a better world for you, then we don't deserve to survive as a species, I think. So that's what I do, is try to use children.
What are the best strategies to assist developing nations on the path to sustainability? China and India in particular, and the problem of many more fossil fuel use in those countries. The criticism has been made that those of us in the West have sort of found religion rather late,
yep.
And now we want them to follow the same rules.
Right.
Could you comment?
So, you know, I was at Kyoto in 1997. And China was there, India was there, the developing world was there. Everybody there agreed. The industrialized world, the rich countries, created the problem. It was our industrial growth using fossil fuels that filled the atmosphere with more carbon dioxide than it could be removed. So it was, and we were still in 97 the major contributors of carbon dioxide. It was our responsibility then to begin to cap and reduce our emissions while allowing the developing world to grow their economy. And then by 2012, the idea was we would all now gather together and go to the next stage where everybody's included. Now, China's growth and India's growth was far beyond anything we imagined in 1997. But the reality is, yes, China now has passed the United States in total greenhouse gas emissions, but per capita, they're a quarter of yours per capita. So, you know, and the thing is that once Kyoto was signed, in Canada, we immediately, Alberta and the government said, well, it's not fair. China and India aren't included. But we agreed in Kyoto. They didn't create the problem. We did. So it was our responsibility. Then Canadians said, well, we're only 2% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the world. Yeah, but our population is 0.5% of the total population of the world. We're producing far more per person than we should be. And if we don't set the example and cap and reduce our emissions, why should India or China pay any attention to us? We created the problem, and we continue to demand more growth and use of fossil fuels, and we tell the developing world, you can't do that, not good. Absolutely immoral for us to take that position. We created it, we set the example.
Dr. Suzuki, you mentioned to me backstage that your information is that 30 of the 34 nations that signed Kyoto actually have met their goals. Could you comment on those that did not and what lessons we should learn from it?
Well, I mean, the sad thing is that the major country that is not anywhere close is my country, Canada. And that's because Canada signed and ratified Kyoto. We committed ourselves then. 34 countries have signed Kyoto, and when Putin ratified in 2004, it became international law that we were all committed to do that. Now, The countries that are not, some countries had a huge advantage. After Kyoto was signed, Germany, East Germany and West Germany formed one country. East German factories were very, very inefficient. They shut them down, and immediately their greenhouse gas emissions as a country went down. So in England, they were heavily dependent on coal. They shut down the coal plants to go towards natural gas and oil, and so right away, so they had it easy by just becoming more modern and efficient. But if you take a country like Sweden, Sweden imposed a carbon tax in the mid-1990s. Today, they pay $120 a ton for carbon dioxide. The only jurisdiction in North America that has a carbon tax is my province of British Columbia, $10 a ton. Now, we don't hesitate to pay $90 a ton in Canada to put garbage into landfills. But that $10 a ton tax in British Columbia everybody is screaming holy murder about this. And this government, we're in an election mode now, could very well fall because of our $10 a ton carbon tax. The Swedes have $120 a ton. They're going to increase that more. And in that time, from the 1990s to 2006, their greenhouse gas emissions fell 8% below 1990 levels. And their economy in the same time grew by 44%. So what's all this baloney about we can't do anything to reduce emissions because it'll destroy the economy? In that same period, Canadian emissions grew by over 25%. So we're going the wrong way, and all in the name of economic growth.
You commented that you are pleased or at least encouraged with what's coming out of the Obama administration. Could you expand on that?
Well, I think that what we saw in the Bush administration, I'm a foreigner, I'm not passing judgment, but I think it was absolutely abominable that you would have a president who would literally shut down or shut up your government scientists and to vet government documents on climate change to tamp down or dampen the impact of the reports on climate change, to make it seem as if it's not that serious an issue. I believe that future generations will say that was criminal. And what do we do then? What do we do when you attempt to suppress scientists and keep their message from informing political decisions? What do you do then? Do you rely on the Bible? Is that what we're going to look to as our authority? Or the Quran? I mean, what the hell are we doing if we're not listening to the scientists and getting their really important advice? And I think that's why I couldn't believe it when I saw the people that President Obama put in place right away. Jane Lubchenco is one of the top ecologists in the world, to put her in charge of NOAA, And there's Stephen Chu, a Nobel Prize winner, to head energy. I mean, it's astounding to see, and the people that he's put in as advisors in biology. It's a signal that science is being taken seriously, and you can see it in terms of the way he's talking about energy policy. He's opened up stem cell research. I mean, all kinds of other things have now been indicated by this administration. And I think part of the reason why we're so excited is by how sad the situation was before he came in. The reality is that Mr. Obama has inherited a mess. It's just a terrible inheritance, and I hope he can continue to inspire us. But I know that if you have listened to the loony fringe here, from Rush Limbaugh to Ann Coulter to Hanratty and these guys, they're just beating him up in a way. I just find it outrageous. And these are the same people that if you had ever said anything bad about Bush, they would have beat you up for saying that about the President of the United States. But anyway, I hope he can stay the course.
Two final questions. How is the current financial crisis expected to impact environmental issues?
Well, as I say right now, if you shift your focus to the economy, and then act as if the environment is just one of those special interests, then of course the environmental movement will be impacted. But from my standpoint, I have an organization. It's a small organization. Our budget was over $8 million last year. And we do not take government money. We will accept corporate money if the corporations are practicing the series principles, which are principles of sustainability. We haven't had to worry about industrial corporate support. We get our support basically from charitable foundations or from the general public. But our charitable foundation support is almost dried. We lost $1.5 million this year because they live on the interest of their investments. And our individual support is dipped, but not very much. These are people that give us $50, $60, and for them that's a big donation, but they are the core of our support. So our basic support is there. We have been hit, and I know that all the other environmental organizations have been hit similarly by the economic downturn in terms of their funding. But the interesting thing is that despite the meltdown, if you read the business magazines, or even conventional ones like Time or Newsweek, green has not disappeared. And I think that Obama was right. This is the new growth area. This is where the jobs are going to come, in the green sector and renewable energy. This is the economic opportunity.
Yeah. Last question. And this one seems that people wanted to know what could be their personal role. In what area can I make the biggest personal positive impact on the environment?
Well, it's a huge issue. It depends on if you want to commit yourself. You know, young kids come to me and they say, what can I do to be most effective? And I always tell them, follow your heart. You know, if you want to be an engineer, be the best engineer, but change that kind of engineering so that you don't violate the ecological principles of sustainability. You know, go out and do whatever you want in whatever passion you have, but make it an ecological commitment as well to transform that area. In terms of individuals, my foundation worked with the Union of Concerned Scientists in Boston, and we came up with what we believe are the 10 most effective things that individuals can do. Go to our website, davidsuzuki.org. I don't think you jam our internet signals from Canada. And look for, we call it the Nature Challenge. These are the 10 most effective things individuals can do. And the 3 areas where we all impact on the environment are where we live, what we eat, and how we move. So food, housing, and transportation. That's what we focused on. And we came up with these simple, and they're so easy. When I first got the list of 10 things, I threw it on the floor and said, come on, that's, you know, serious. I thought you had to sell your house and live in a cave or something. But, you know, if all of us are doing these 10 things, believe me, the impact will be huge. And they're simple things like don't eat meat 1 day a week. And if you're a Catholic, you know, they used to do that all the time, right? And we say leave your car at home 1 day a week. I mean, they're very simple things, but you can actually calculate how much of an impact that has when you begin to do this. And the 10th thing is you've got to be very, very active in the political process if you live in a democracy. Now, if all 300 million Americans were doing all of these 10 things, that would be huge. But believe me, it won't have got us off on a different direction. What it does is it slows down, reduces our impact, our footprint, and gives us time, because right now the critical issue is time. I've always used the metaphor that I feel like we're in a giant car heading at a brick wall at 100 miles an hour, and everybody in the car is arguing about where they want to sit. You know, somebody's got to say, for God's sake, put the brake on and turn the wheel. Those of us that are saying that, we're locked in the trunk, nobody hears us. So, but we're heading right down that way. And so if we do these 10 things, we will at least slow down the car, so if it does finally hit, it won't be as hard as it could have been. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. Appreciate it immensely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. If you haven't picked up your book yet, outside of the door, We hope you'll participate in our recycling drive, and I hope you will continue to support your individual effort, as Dr. Suzuki has just said. And Dr. Suzuki will be signing books in the just outside of the auditorium, so start lining up now with your books. If you don't have them, I think they're on sale out there. But bring your books. Thank you very much. See you in the fall.